Hello and good evening. Welcome to our afternoon Tertulia, which is actually in the early evening today. Um, and it's Pura Belpre's Perez y Martina, 90 years, the 90th anniversary of Perez y Martina. November 2022 marks the 90th anniversary of Pura Belpre's Perez y Martina. And today I'm joined by William Walker of SUNY Oneonta and Paloma Celis Carbajal of New York Public Library to discuss Pura Belpre and the importance of representation and access and the impact of that our respective research centers, NYPL and Centro, have had on preserving her history. I'd like to say that this event is in partnership with Body Mix, so thank you for your collaboration. I'd like to introduce Paloma Celis Carbajal. She serves as the curator for Latin American, Iberian, and Latino studies collections. She's responsible for the development of the collections in these areas in the arts, humanities, and social sciences. Prior to joining the New York Public Library, she served for 14 years as the bibliographer for Ibero-American Studies and Romance Languages at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her most recent publication is Cartonera Publishers of Cardboard Boxes and Cultural Capital in the Routledge Companion to 20th and 21st Century Latin American Literary and Cultural Forms. We're also joined by William S. Walker, an Associate Professor of History at the Cooperstown Graduate Program in Museum Studies at SUNY Oneonta. He is the author of a living exhibition, The Smithsonian and the Transformation of the Universal Museum, University of Massachusetts Press, and an editor of the Inclusive Historian's Handbook. The handbook is a digital resource co-sponsored by the American Association for State and Local History and the National Council for Public History. Walker has also served as a lead editor for History at Work, the NCPH blog, and as an editor for the New York History Journal. He's an active public historian and frequently collaborates with students to create diverse community-based programming. And the main focus of Walker's teaching and public history practice is in inclusive programming rooted to dialogic methodologies. He is a recognized leader in the field of public history who is committed to advancing inclusion in the world of museums and historical institutions. His current book project is New York Storytellers and the American Roots Renaissance, 1920 through 1940. It examines the critical role played by New York-based storytellers such as Pura Belpre, who we are discussing this evening, Zora Neale Hurston and Jesse Cornplanter, in defining the diverse and multilingual heritage of the United States. Thank you both so much for joining me this evening. I always strive, especially this being like a library and archive centric presentation, I always strive to let everybody know that Centro is not the only game in town. It certainly is, Pura's collection is certainly core to definitely a lot of the work that we do. But if you are conducting research into Pura Belpre, into what her legacy meant as a storyteller, as the first Puerto Rican librarian in the NYPL, and on, you need to include NYPL in your research. And I think the tying up, the factor here is Will's research. Will has conducted research with both our institutions. So welcome, Will. To those that are new to what Centro is doing, who might not be familiar with our collections, we have a collection of Pura Belpre's papers here at the Center for Puerto Rican Studies. It is one of the cornerstone collections here. You can see our stacks behind us. In addition, we have a lovely collection of books about her and books that she has produced. And there was a documentary that was produced as well. But Paloma, what else do you have? Do you guys have that complements our collection that helps people, put all these evidentiary materials together?
I think I continue with this idea that what you just started, the comment about not thinking of one institution in New York being the only resource for a topic, in this case, Pura Belpre. This, especially with Pura Belpre, it is very interesting to see how we complement each other, our institutions, and it speaks to her involvement in the community, right? And her life beyond NYPL. and of course her work and how important and her legacy at the New York Public Library and in librarianship in general. Also, she did revolutionize the concept of storytelling, bilingual storytelling, right? And very advanced for her time, and think of what diversity and inclusion mean.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have, like you say, the core of her papers are at Centro, but there are complements to that core archive that are on her personal life. That would be Clarence Cameron White's papers, which are at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, who was her husband. And there's many letters that you will find that were written by Pura also in relation to, among them, correspondence among them, but also in relation to his tours, his work as a musician, his concerts. Also, she helped support in that way, but also on the side of the NYPL, the institutional archives and the reports on her work from the first period that she worked from in the 1920s and later on when she came back. So there are on both archives or papers related to both of her times. And we will be talking about also the puppets, right? And how there's also evidence, and we are very lucky also to have another set of puppets that she used for her story times. One thing that I was going to say in terms of the institutional archives is, again, that the library has in 2 different places institution archives where you can find materials related to Pura Belpre. One is the one I mentioned already, the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, and the other one is the Schwartzman building, Stephen A. Schwartzman building in 42nd and 5th Avenue. That's where we have the institutional archive of the library. And Schomburg has the Clarence Cameron White papers, but also the 135th Street branch records. So there's many places that people will need to make sure that they go and look for materials.
Definitely. And also the places are not that geographically removed from one another. Like we're Centro's on 119th Street and 3rd Avenue, and the Schomburg Center is not that far. On a nice enough day, you can make a nice walk there. And then, of course, you can always take the train downtown to the main branch of the NYPL. And, Pura Belpre was, she received her formation as a librarian through the NYPL's library school. A lot of people didn't know that the NYPL had a library school at one point. So, we offer these resources and, our respective institutions. Will is the perfect example of someone that takes advantage of these types of institutions. So Will, walk us through Pura, what she means to you in your research, and what you were able to discover.
Sure. Yeah. So first, just to start off with some thank yous to Centro, to the New York Public Library, to the Schomburg Center, for hosting me and making these resources available. And the librarians and archivists at all of these institutions have been extraordinary and have really facilitated access and have been research partners too. And so I think it's really important to point that out and give credit there. A couple of other folks too, Manuel Moran, who was going to join us tonight, but is receiving an award. Teatro Sea is receiving an award, so isn't able to be with us, but he has been helpful as well. And of course, Lisa Sanchez Gonzalez as well, and her work, and research on Belpré has been important for me too. So yeah, I'm thrilled to be able to offer a tiny little piece of this research tonight, and happy to talk about it and answer questions, and hopefully get an opportunity to share some more at another time. I think it makes so much sense to start this conversation with talking about libraries, because the library was and is a critical hub not only for research on Belpré, but also in understanding her life and her career, right? The New York Public Library was the place where she first shared Perez and Martina, not as a published book, but as a story that she told to children, to audiences in the library. And, you know, families and children, you know, a community that was hungering really for bilingual storytelling, storytelling that they could connect to. And the library was also a place where Belpré became really a leading voice for bilingual literature and bilingual education. So it just makes so much sense to start with libraries, start and end with libraries, really. So I'll share now just a little bit of what I found in these wonderful places. So first, very basically, if you're just learning about Pura Belpre, who was she? She was, as Aníbal said, the first Puerto Rican librarian in the New York Public Library system. She was the author of the first major bilingual Spanish, English, Hispanic, Latinx children's book in the United States, Perez and Martina. She was a storyteller. She was a puppeteer. And the author of several books of Puerto Rican and Hispanic Latinx folktales. She was a key figure in bringing Puerto Rican and Hispanic Latinx culture to New York and the mainland United States. And she was a major proponent of bilingual education and bilingual literature over many decades. I'm particularly focused on the early part of her career, so the first 2 decades of her career from 1920 to the early 1940s. She was born in Cidra, near Cayey, and she lived in Cayey, moved around a bit, which was not unusual at the time. You know, late 19th century, early 20th century, there's a lot of disruption on the island, of course, because many reasons, but she ends up moving to Cayey, then Arroyo, then Guayama, then San Juan, and she goes to high school in San Juan. In 1920, she came to New York to attend her sister Elisa's wedding and decided to stay. And most of her family came and stayed as well. In 1921, she was hired by the 135th Street branch in Harlem and began right away to tell stories there. As Aníbal said, she attended the New York Public Library School in 1925, 1926. Very briefly then moved down to the Lower East Side to the Seward Park branch. And then transferred back to Harlem, but not to 135th Street, but to 115th Street, which at the time was the center of a thriving and growing Puerto Rican community in Southwest Harlem. She stayed there for about a decade, and it was in that time that her storytelling and her community outreach, her programs in the community really blossomed. And it was in that time that Perez and Martina was published as well. In the late 30s, she moved briefly to the Hamilton Grange branch, also uptown, and then moved to the Aguilar branch in East Harlem. In 1943, she married the composer Clarence Cameron White and decided to leave the New York Public Library, continued to tell stories, continued to travel and write, but for about a decade and a half was not working in the library. And then after he passed away, she came back in 1960 to work for another 2 decades in the library. So this is what we're talking about. This is what we're celebrating. This is a reprint from 1961 of the original 1932 edition. But I think it's pretty faithful. I'd like to talk with Paloma about finding a real first edition.
Oh, we have one.
Yeah, I'm sure.
There, and I think you do too, right, Aníbal?
That's correct. Yeah. We as part of the donation of her papers, we received a significant portion of her library as well. So
Great. Well, I still need to look at that. But this is the copy that happens to be in my college's library. So it was easy for me to find. And you can see it was published by a major publisher, also the publisher of Beatrix Potter's works, and other major children's authors.
I love the colors.
Yeah. I have not been able to find really anything about the illustrator, Carlos Sanchez M.
I tried also, and I haven't found much, but it's a matter of I'll keep digging around and I'll let you know.
There are other books that he illustrated from the time period, but beyond that.
But and he was, I can't remember if he was Puerto Rican too.
I thought I had tracked him down, but it was the wrong artist. It was another artist.
This is just goes to show you more fertile ground for research that you can conduct.
Yeah.
Just on one book even.
Yeah. I also like how the artist keeps more or less the size. How do you call that? The fact that Martina's house is small versus the size of the cricket and the frog.
The proportions are all
proportions, exactly. Yeah. Not quite, but there's still, it does take it into consideration, proportions.
Yeah. So here she explicitly says that this story has come to her through oral tradition, right?
It's interesting. She says mouth to mouth.
Yeah, mouth to mouth. All right.
Yeah.
This is a translation, right? No, actually, she wrote it first in English.
Yeah, so she wrote it first in English, but it was like pages like this where you can see it's bilingual, right? So,
no, but the boca a boca is what she was thinking about, the mouth to mouth, right?
Right. But that was in English, yeah.
Something important to I think to emphasize is the fact that her decision to have English and Spanish present. It's not only one or the other. It's the fact that both can coexist in the same page, right?
Yeah, they're really woven together throughout.
Just like our languages coexist here where we live and where we have English and Spanish coexisting in our lives.
That's a fairly radical concept when you think about it. When you think about the idea that literature for children was still a pretty new concept at this time, and on top of that, bilingual literature for children. I mean, just to consider how far ahead of the curve she was.
So we are celebrating the 90th anniversary of the publication of Perez and Martina as a book, but we are actually approaching the 100th anniversary, the centennial of the first telling of Perez and Martina by Pura Belpre in the New York Public Library. I thought at first that we were actually celebrating the centennial this year, because in my research I found that she had told a story called Perez the Mouse in December 1922. But I was wrong. That is a different story. It's the same character, El Raton Perez or Ratoncito Perez. It's the same character, but it's a different story. So the earliest evidence that I have found of Belpré telling Perez and Martina comes from 1924, May 1924, when there were 2 documented tellings. So first, that 1922 story. So this is from the notes, the records of the 135th Street branch. The librarians would write up reports that they had to send in. And in this report, they wrote about how Belpré, as part of a Christmas Eve program, told the story Perez the Mouse. She also talked about the 3 kings, right? So she wove in the Hispanic tradition of the 3 kings into this Christmas Eve program. But the story Perez the Mouse that she told there was most likely the one that you see, which was the story of the Tooth Fairy.
Mhm.
So in many, as you know, as in many Spanish-speaking countries, the Tooth Fairy is El Ratoncito Perez, right?
Mhm.
This is a story that was likely made up by Padre Luis Coloma in the 19th century, but it became part of the folk tradition. And what he was doing was drawing on a folk character too. Perez the Mouse predated that story. He appeared earlier in literature and likely was a folk character even before that. So even though it wasn't Perez and Martina, it was folklore and it was an important story. So here's what I believe are the two first tellings of Perez and Martina. They're both from May 1924. I have the exact date of one, which is May 8th, 1924. And this was a telling for school children. You can even see PS 89, right? 14 boys, 8 girls. Read from Mary Meg, which is another book of stories, and told Martina and Perez the Mouse by Pura Belpre. She also told it as part of a storytelling symposium that was a New York Public Library wide program run by her mentor, Mary Gould Davis. And so that's what's mentioned in the report on the other side, that they were proud of her for telling. It says, another tale. She translated from the Spanish another tale of Perez the Mouse and told it as her mother and grandmother had done in entertaining her when she was a child. The Spanish touches and the little song make this story very charming.
Just to complement these reports, there's an interesting one that my colleague Barry Brown, the librarian at Schomburg Center in charge of the rare books division, she was super graceful and went and looked also for other possible reports of interest. And there's one that mentions from 1923 that's mentioning Belpré's taking a great deal of responsibility and initiative in her work. So, and we can see it with what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. That is, I've seen that in other reports as well, and in fact, in the recommendations she received to attend the library school. Remark on her storytelling ability and her initiative and her talent. She was really, in terms of her like cross-cultural, what we would call kind of intercultural communication skills, they were extraordinary.
And she was also very, very knowledgeable of children's books, like the tradition of children's books in general. Sure. There's among those reports, there's something about a talk that she gave on Calleja, for example. So she puts everything together in such a way in a perfect package for children, which is also something to recognize of hers.
Yeah, and she wasn't only telling stories from her own tradition, right? She was learning and telling Danish stories and Irish stories and French stories and Italian stories. They were all, and her colleagues, the other librarians, were telling these stories as well. There was an embrace of pluralism in the New York Public Library at that time. And you can see it reflected in the kinds of stories, especially in the kinds of stories that were being told, which makes sense because it was and is a very diverse city, right? So I think we made it to the puppet. So one of the things that Manuel and I talked about is when did she start incorporating puppetry into her work? And I don't have a firm answer on that yet. I don't believe it was right at the beginning. I believe it probably was in the mid-30s that she started incorporating puppetry, but it may have been earlier than that. But certainly from then on, puppetry becomes central to her performance of storytelling.
And it was also an innovation for the library. I would love to know what motivated her to do it. Of course, it has to do with make it more attractive to children, but exactly what was it would be great to know or find, maybe hopefully in her papers. So we have this is these are the ones that right now that we're showing, the puppets of the Cucarachita Martina and the Raton Perez are the ones that are housed at the New York Public Library. These were donated by Pura Belpre. We don't know exactly the date, it's not documented, but what we think is what we are thinking about, when I talk about we, it's many people, and it's not only me, that the one that has worked on this, and Michael Lindman, the curator for rare books at the Schwarzman building, has been instrumental in me being able to show these puppets. Now he took these wonderful pictures, by the way. So we have been thinking that she must have donated these in the late 1960s, around the time when her second time working at the library concluded. They resided at the Donnell Library on 53rd Street as part of the Historic Children's Collection until 2008. When this collection that housed most of NYPL's rare children's materials, including some objects such as Pura Belpre's puppets, or the other ones that are very well known in terms of objects, three-dimensional objects, are Winnie the Pooh stuffed toys too, were part of this historic children's collection. Then this was moved and is now housed at the Rare Book Division, located at the Stephen A. Schwarzman building. As you can see, the condition is, we have 6 puppets, and the condition ranges from fair to quite good. Luckily, Perez and Martina are in pretty decent shape. There's some things that, like the neck of one of them is slightly broken, but you can see that they're very good condition, even though you can also see that they were very well loved and used, heavily used. It's very nice to see them also speaking with Aníbal, and we'll show them in a second. Centro's puppets too, which I think might be earlier than this.
Yeah, they're early. They are in very delicate shape. They don't stand up to being touched, and they don't really come out of storage all that often. As you can see, everything was done using paper mache, wire hangers, scraps of fabric, scraps of lace. Yeah, we're currently looking at conservation for these, so that we can make them more readily available. I know that Manuel at Teatro Sea, they based off the photographs and of a lot of the puppets, that we're able to make reproductions that are currently on display, that were on display at the Smithsonian. That very much, they look pretty great. If anybody's ever had the chance to see them in action, they're beautiful.
They're inspired by Centro's puppets, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And here we wanted to show them side by side, so you can see the 2 versions of the Cucarachita Martina. Ours are also being in there. We're starting the process of evaluating them for possible conservation work. So it's going to take a good amount of time. We don't know exactly how long. And like you say, Aníbal, they're not available really right now to consult.
Yeah. We've done a job. We've added as many pictures of them as we can. And in addition to Perez and Martina, we also have some other puppets that are not related to that story. And one of the frog also from the Perez and Martina story we have. And that's on our, you can see those pictures on our digital collection.
So here are the two ratoncito Perez, and then we have a couple, I think the next one shows some more puppets from the ones we have at NYPL. Oh, we don't. Okay. So it was just Perez and Martina, which are the ones we are talking about tonight.
Absolutely.
Do we want to do the recording now?
That's right. Yeah. So Paloma, this is really this is such a pleasure that we're actually getting this. So, based on the requests of researchers and on researchers constantly wanting to engage with Pura's materials, that initiates the library wanting to get more material available online. So Paloma, what do we have? What are you going to share with us?
So as Aníbal said, we're super excited, and I want to thank Julie Golia, the head of Manuscripts and Archives division at the Schwarzman Library, for allowing us to play these few minutes of an audio file. There's audio files of Pura Belpre, of other librarians too, in our institutional archives that have recently surfaced thanks to Will's research, actually. And we're in the process of digitizing them. The process is still not finalized. That's why they're not yet available to the public. But I was allowed to play a part of the only file that I've been able to that I have access to. But I found it very important the way it's a moment in, we're not certain of exactly the date or who Pura Belpre is addressing. We know it's a group of students, but we don't know where and we don't know when. But it's 45 minutes of her talking about the history of Puerto Rico mainly, and the diverse nature of the island, the multicultural nature of Puerto Rico. And I find it very significant how she decides to start that talk. And we're talking about students. I don't know, we don't know exactly the age of the students, but they're not small children. That's the only thing I could tell from how she speaks to them. So let me share this with you. Please let me know if you can hear it. But here we go.
And please interrupt me whenever you want to, and for anything that you may. What is Puerto Rico like? Said Pepe Coquí. Now, Pepe Coquí, which is a wonderful name, the last part, Coquí, is one little insect in Puerto Rico, really a very tiny tree frog. And he is the hero in a very wonderful book written by Doris Troutman Plen called The Green Song or La Canción Verde. It's a fantasy. She says there, and I want to tell you that she came to Puerto Rico and she was ill and she was sent up to the highlands to recuperate. And when the sun went down, she began to hear these noises and they grew louder and louder and louder, and she wondered what it was. And when asking the following morning, they said, oh, those coquí. What are they? Tree frogs. They're very quick and very fast. And
sorry. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm not sure why it sometimes does this. Oh, just give me a second. I'll open it again. It's just a matter of opening it again. Here it is.
well,
So just as
first of all, I want to thank you for the name. Tree frog. And he is the hero in a very wonderful book written by Doris Troutman Glenn, called The Green Song or La Canción Verde. It's a fantasy. She says there, and I want to tell you that she came to Puerto Rico and she was ill, and she was sent up to the highlands to recuperate. And when the sun went down, she began to hear these little noises, and they grew louder and louder and louder, and she wondered what it was. And when asking the following morning, they said, "Oh, those coquilles. What are they?" Three frogs. They're very quick and very fast, and they go up and down on the stalk of the trees. So she began to think, and to her, it was like a symphony orchestra. And then she began to think, and this green song is the product of all her thinking. Is the story of a tree frog who hears a great deal about New York. But you see, this tree frog, this coquille, believed that they are the ones that keep the world together. And so, by singing together, they are responsible for the sun to be in the sky, the moon to shine, the stars to twinkle, and if anyone ever dares break that song, something will happen. So then he gets very curious hearing about this New York. He wants to know, and he comes to New York. It's a very humorous book. She writes very beautiful. I mean, she really must be a poet, because she just sings to the island. But this coquille is quite a character. So when he is in Central Park, the animals are so honored because, of course, as you know, a coquille only lives in Puerto Rico. Es oriundo de Puerto Rico. And so when he comes, all the animals come to meet him. And then is this question: what is Puerto Rico like? And Pepe Coquille, which is the name, Pepe, he thinks, doesn't answer immediately. And then he says, Puerto Rico is just like myself. Small and of many colors.
Wow, that was lovely. I mean, that thing is, gave me goosebumps, because that's, anytime you get to hear her speak. We have some questions here in the Q&A. Someone asks which book was written first, the English or Spanish edition. Perez and Martina was released as a bilingual publication, right? So it was a bilingual book, which is what made it so revolutionary at the time. So this is for you and I, Paloma. Do either of our collections have audio recordings of Pura performing Perez y Martina?
Yes.
So
Yes.
at NYPL they have audio of Perez and Martina.
Our finding aid mentions there's audio of Perez and Martina, but I haven't heard it yet, so we don't know exactly the condition of it. We're in the process of looking at them and evaluating the conditions of these. They're audio cassettes.
Okay. Which can always be tricky. There's an assessment that needs to go on, and then you have to send it off to your digitizers, and all sorts of metadata needs to go on it before it can be added to a digital platform. Is there a link available for that audio clip or a transcript? I would find this immensely valuable for my current research project. A lot of people really, I think that audio was the showstopper here. Paloma, you said that this is specifically for this event that you were able to get us this exclusive access. When can we expect to see this online? Do you have an idea?
I don't have an idea yet, but I do know that it is made available for researchers. Unfortunately, it has to be that you have to go and consult it in our space yet, because we're in the process of digitizing it. So once it's ready to be released to the public, then it will go into our digital collections. But in the meantime, I feel free to contact me, and I will help out too. The clip was just the first minutes of a 46.5 long recording.
Right. And if you want, on our digital page, we have a sit-down interview that Lillian Lopez, who was another Puerto Rican librarian, at NYPL and a branch head at NYPL sat down and did an extensive interview with Pura. We have a question that Will, I think I'd like you to field. In Pura Belpre's writings and initiatives for bilingual literature, are they explored across other academic disciplines in your investigation, Will?
Well, I believe that Lisa Sanchez Gonzalez is a literary scholar, you know, so they're absolutely, yeah. I mean, that I think what I've come across, most of the folks who have been interested in Belpré are either in Puerto Rican studies or in libraries and librarianship, and or are literary scholars.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there's immense opportunity here, I think, because her work crosses disciplines. You know, as we heard, she's talking about history, and you know, certainly anthropologists and sociologists as well could find things of interest. I have a good friend who you know, does studies language retention, and that was an influence for me. Yeah, I see somebody says early childhood education, absolutely, right? And so, yeah, learning about kind of language retention studies was an influence for me, and just thinking about my own family, my experience, you know, of that Spanish wasn't really retained, you know, and I know there are many families like that. So, you know, she was pushing against the powerful forces of assimilation.
I think another area that could be studied is from the point of view of publishing, the history of publishing in the United States, and what was happening at the time that she decides to publish her books bilingually, like you say.
Yeah, it's really, I've been trying to track down the records of the Frederick Warney company, Warren, I'm not even sure how to pronounce it, honestly, even though they were a major publisher. There are a couple of archives in the UK that have little bits and pieces, and I've asked them, do you have anything about Perez and Martina? And so far they've said, no, we have nothing. But I have been looking at other books published around the same time. I mean, the big book published in 1932 for young readers was Little House in the Big Woods. The first Laura Ingalls Wilder book was also published in 1932. But there were books being published, translations of works that were originally published in other languages, you know, Swedish, German, Italian, French, that, you know, that were being published in the 1920s and early 30s. So it was, Perez and Martina was not entirely unusual in that regard. There was clearly an interest among publishers in, if not bilingual texts, at least stories from other countries and other cultures.
Sure. So unfortunately, this is just not nearly enough time to cover everything we wanted to cover, but we do encourage you to, anybody who's attended, please do engage with us via our respective institutions, via the NYPL, via our digital collections. And I definitely, I'm going to have Will back with us once he publishes his book. In the chat, there's all sorts of great links, so please be sure to look through the links, links to make appointments and whatnot. But I really want to thank our sponsor, Body Mix. The 2022 Body Mix Festival is underway with plenty of events featuring live music, art exhibitions, workshops, and more. It's continuing through the month of November, Puerto Rican Heritage Month. Don't miss out. Check out bodymix.com for more information, and stay tuned for the newest book from Teatro Sea Publications, The Journey of Pura Belpre's Tales, a theater book that compiles some of Pura's most famous stories. The book will be available for purchase soon from teatrosea.org. Also, Teatro Sea is doing all sorts of great work. You can go take your children to their theater, and you can watch La Cucarachita Martina, The Little Roach, a Latino rock and roll musical based on the popular Puerto Rican children's tale. And this is at Teatro Sea at the Clemente on 107 Suffolk Street. And you can go to their website, teatrosea.org, to find out how you can get tickets to that presentation on November 19th. I can't thank Paloma and Will enough. Thank you so much for sharing just a little bit about your respective collections. And Will, thank you so much for sharing about your research. So please do feel free to reach out to us. If anyone has any questions afterwards, the Central librarians are here, NYPL librarians are here, and we can put you in contact with Will if you have any in-depth questions, or you want to conduct your own research and you want to get a head start. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, rest of your evening. And please do join Centro, sign up for our newsletter for future tertulias such as this, our library lunch hours, and other events that are coming in the month of November. Thank you.
Thank you.